to Fujitsu World Tour. The theme of this year's event is Driving a Trusted Future. There's a lot of change going on in industry right now, isn't there? New ecosystems, there's new processes coming out, new technologies, cause a few headaches for boardrooms and the wider public. How do we deliver that digital transformation? How do we disrupt? And how do we continue to deliver value back to the business, for colleagues, empower and enable them to go and do great things? But how do we also impact the wider society? Well, we've got you back this year at Fujitsu World Tour. We're going to help you identify the mix of partners, technologies, solutions, and insight required to address all of those queries your boardroom is facing. Up next, we're going to be talking public sector and Citizen Z. There was a high-profile panel session here earlier that was looking at the trust in technology against the geopolitical backdrop of distrust in some technologies that are out there. There's been a number of issues, high-profile across the media of late. Can we truly trust technology, and can it make an impact for good within society? Well, hopefully to address all of that and share some insight around some of the key challenges, I'm joined by four panellists: Georgina O'Toole, Chief Analyst from TMV, Helen Olsen, UK Authority founder, Professor Vishanth Weerakkody, who's the Head of School Management, University of Bradford, and a man I probably don't need to introduce now, we've seen him so many times, but Patrick Stephenson, back to help us understand what's going on. Of course, he's the Client Managing Director for Central and Regional Government. Helen, you ran the session earlier. Why don't we start with understanding the key points that came out of the panel session?
We had a brilliant and wide-ranging conversation looking at how we put citizens first as we deliver public services, and how does the public sector meet the digital expectations that citizens have from, say, doing their online banking, shopping, living their social lives online, etc. Should government meet the same expectations? Are we a customer of government when you pay your taxes? Do you really want to be a customer? When your bin's missed, are you a customer? Have you any choice in that? So we were debating this whole issue of how we transform government with technology. And we came to the conclusion, actually, that there are some amazing models out there in new countries such as Estonia, and there are some amazing potentials. The technology isn't the problem. The problem in the UK that's holding us back is our centuries of infrastructure and legacy systems and legal infrastructure and policy and culture. So they're the soft issues almost that are holding us back from saying, actually, the technology, we can do this, but maybe we're not quite ready for it in the public sector in the UK. So one example, for example, Patrick, we were talking about Estonia, what the future could look like in a country that was a beautiful green field. It was a new country. They didn't have hundreds of years old departments, and they had an amazing opportunity. How did they approach it?
Yeah, so I talk about Estonia quite a lot, and CJ, you also mentioned Citizen Z at the start. So just to join Estonia and Citizen Z together, Citizen Z, 50% of our working population by 2025 will be Generation Z. Generation Z in the UK will want government services to be simpler, better, and digital. Okay, so that generation will be expecting services to be digital by default. So what that really means, let's look at Estonia. Since 2001, all of their processes have been digital, no paper whatsoever in that government. People do argue that they were born in 1991, so a greenfield state, 1.5 million population, not as complicated as the UK. I would argue there is a lot of learning around the societal change within Estonia, how they've become a digital society. There's a lot for us to learn from that, and there's a lot of the technology where they've created a system around life events and episodes. So government departments, they call it frictionless government or invisible government. So Estonians have a digital by default service every day of their lives, and they absolutely love that service.
Vishanth, why do you think that we can't replicate that digital nirvana here in the UK? What's holding us back?
I think, as you quite nicely summarized earlier, it's about the complexity of government in the UK and the legacy of over 50 years of technology and processes, and the legislative environment in the UK is preventing. So almost softer issues, as you quite rightly pointed out there. And also, I'd kind of like to touch upon your point about, almost born in 1991, right? If you look at a person born in the UK in 1991 and ask that person how much of government is he aware of? What interactions does a young person have with government in the UK context at the moment? Almost none, because most of it is taken care of by parents, whatever. But most of the kids these days are pretty technology savvy. They are happy to interact with private sector, social media, shopping, etc. But when you ask a young person, do you know anything about digital government, what's offered digitally, very few will actually have a clue of what his responsibilities are, his or her responsibilities are with government. So again, it's a matter of kind of educating and starting from scratch. So going back to 20 years, we started with the journey of live events. That was the whole purpose of digital government.
Yep.
It never really happened. So we are no different to Estonia in that our ambitions were the same, but something else prevented us from arriving to where we wanted to arrive. And I think we've been going around in a circle reinventing things for the last couple of years. So that's pretty disappointing at the moment.
So, Georgina, I mean, you've been studying this and you've got quite an interesting theory around digital chaos, which is the state that Vishanth has just described there. Tell us about that one.
Because obviously, I mean, we already had the legacy complexity of, as you say, the 50-odd years of government IT. But over the last few years, we've been trying to tackle the digital by default aim. And what we've done is we've taken point solutions. So we've decentralized the IT function, we've given users more chance to develop themselves, we've pushed digital and IT out into the lines of business. And we've created a lot of, some might say, very useful front-end digital systems that tackle probably the main things that maybe the 20, 30-year-olds are using, get your passport, et cetera, which looks to them to be very digital from the front end. What we haven't done is so much the back-end transformation. What we've done in tackling digital in this way, in pockets, in silos, is created this, what we are calling digital chaos, which really needs to be tackled before we can move on to the next phase, which we're calling more complex digital, which is all about true transformation in the back end, going a lot deeper, actually reinventing government, reinventing the business processes and the way that citizens interact with government, not just putting digital layers over 50 years of government complexity.
Do you think, though, that there's a will? This is one for all of you. Is there a political and cultural will to do that, or are we going to carry on in digital chaos and doing point solutions? And actually, is transformation more than a website? It goes deeper than a pixel.
Yeah, can I actually, I was just thinking about the definition of transformation from back when I did research into my PhD, and the definition is still ringing in my head. It's about transformation was defined by Michael Hammer and James Champy in their book Re-Engineering the Corporation, which actually started most of the transformation movement in the early 1990s, defined as the fundamental rethinking and radical redesign of business processes, organizational strategies, and vision to achieve contemporary measures of performance improvement and cost reduction. That was the definition of transformation. And that means you're changing the shape and size and your focus of what you're almost starting with a clean sheet of paper. So, innovation starts like that, right? Yeah. So I think it's a great definition and a great ambition, but in government it's quite impossible to achieve change what we do completely because of the legislative, the political context, and all of the other issues around it. So it's about understanding and trying to be careful in terms of how you define. Because to me, transformation actually starts with a policy. Politicians develop policies, and then if you look at examples of universal credit or any other big projects that have happened, it's a policy decision that's taken. It's kind of then it goes down to implementation, and it becomes a huge transformation project because you're going to fundamentally change the way things were done, and then you hit the problems of legislation, of legacy, of people, of culture, etc., which derails the project. So I think the sad thing is that we haven't learned from our past mistakes, and we continue to repeat these mistakes. And I think that's where the innovation and that technology thinking from companies like Fujitsu need to come in to help politicians and policymakers understand what IT can do and where is the real gap, between the IT and the policy and the implementation.
So the vision, I think, is there, and as I mentioned earlier, the technology is there. So yes. Patrick, how do you get them to what do they need to do to change? Because it's not a technology problem, is it? It's culture and policy and legal.
Agreed. I suppose there's two approaches. We could take the lean startup disruptive approach to government. I would argue on that approach, trying to re-engineer 50 years of heritage and systems, do we start doing it a different way? Okay, take that lean startup approach. And I've talked earlier on the panel about turning public services outside in to the benefit of citizens. The other approach, I completely agree on the policy side. If you look at the Flemish government, it's taken 7 years for them to get into primary legislation, the tell us once legislation. But now in their statute book, every citizen has got the right to only give information once and for it to be used many times. But also equally, they've got the right to be forgotten once, let's say, a life event, an episode has finished. So I think there is a mixture of policy. I think we're going to have to make some big decisions. And I think we talked earlier about we've got to decide as a country what digital society we want to be. Do we want dystopia or utopia at two extremes, or do we want it to be something in the middle? So I think society's got some decisions. Politicians have got to shape policy to support that. And then you're absolutely right. The technology is there today to deliver joined-up public services.
Georgina, you analyse the market, you sit there and research it, you look at it from both sides, you look at the suppliers and you look at the public sector. Is it going to be as simple as that? Why is it not happening from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, my concern, having analysed the market for probably nearly 20 years now, is that I've been talking about joined-up government for the entire time I've been looking at the market, and from personal experience, that the government experience for a citizen is of a very fragmented government.
Would you mind sharing that experience? Because I know you and I share a similar experience of trying to deal with the public sector.
Yeah. So I have a disabled child. The number of agencies we have to deal with is multiple. You end up having to explain the same thing over and over to multiple agencies. But not only that, when you are trying to receive a service, whether it be funding, disability living allowance, or whether it be a wheelchair, the information that's required to get that is already in the system somewhere. Yet you're required to fill in a 70-odd page form in order to get it and jump through numerous hoops. And I find the issue is, and I think you found the same, is that culturally there is no trust between different public sector organisations. So one organisation will say, your son needs a wheelchair, like you said, and then 2 or 3 different organisations will then get involved to assess, do they really need a wheelchair?
Yes, and no parent aspires for a wheelchair for their child, so really why are we going through
millions
the
of pounds
hoops?
is being spent on this, and it's the same with disability living allowance. The information is already in the system, so why are people being assessed again by a third party? When the information is already there, it causes distress and it causes upset, and it's unnecessary. I fear if after 20 years we still aren't there, how do we change the culture? How do we break down those government silos? Not just so that data is shared, but just so that public sector generally acts as one government rather than as multiple organisations that don't have any faith in each other or won't work together.
Do you think it's helpful, the recent trend, say, over the last 5 to 10 years of holding up the private sector as we need to be as good as Amazon transactionally, we need to be as simple as Facebook and intuitive as that, and everybody is called a customer, but yes, are we customers of paying tax? Is that focus of, say, calling everyone a customer but not actually genuinely looking at the holistic needs of a person, is that helpful, and how do we change the culture to flip that around?
I think that's one of the biggest problems with the trajectory of digital transformation and implementation of digital is that I think there's a lot to draw from understanding the concept of what private sector does and how private sector improves customer experience. But what government has, I think, where it has gone wrong is that the whole concept of customer has been misinterpreted and applied wholesale in government. And that's wrong because I don't see myself as a customer. I'm a tax-paying subject that have certain obligatory requirements that I have to fulfill with government. And 90% of my dealings with either local or central government is obligatory. If I don't do it, that means I will be prosecuted, whether it's council tax, whether it's paying a parking fine, whether it's applying for my passport, renewing my tax disc, etc. One of the interesting examples about the joined-up nature is that it's not that we can't do it. So if you look at the very simple example of the DVLA, which joined up over 15 years ago, I think, it joined up the police, the insurance companies, the motor vehicle dealers, and the DVLA through the DVLA database, and we can tax our vehicle with a click of a button, right? That means the data is shared and it's available. And likewise, in healthcare, in social care, the data is available and the technology is available to do it. It's the policy and the legislative environment and that siloed nature of government and the culture that's preventing us from doing it. And I think that again boils down to strong leadership at local and at central government level to have the commitment and the will to, draw from those brilliant examples of whether it's Estonia or customer services and understand what's applicable and what's not, and segmenting all of these and implementing it in a outcome-oriented fashion.
Patrick?
Yeah, what I would say is there's some hope here. Yeah, and the hope I'd apply to this is, if you look at government digital services, we've really started to understand human-centric design. So they've obviously been a great advocate of that. They've set that up across government departments. Government departments are using some of that best practice now, and they're thinking about the user in user design, whole system journey maps. And I think a lot of work's been done within departmental silos to improve and optimise the customer experience or citizen experience. Now, departments, GDS, government departments and private sector organisations like Fujitsu are starting to look at how we can use tech for good to make that user journey experience work. I would argue consumer, citizen, user, whatever we want to call people, I just want simpler, better government services. Yeah, so I don't really mind what we call people. I just want things to be better.
And I think that's a very important point, just to add on to that, is that we talk about citizen-centric government and the user. Where am I as a citizen involved in the design stage of a certain, and I think that's where journey mapping is very important. And it's sad to see that it's only happening now. It should have happened 20 years ago. Yeah. And these are fundamental design issues and system issues that have been ignored. And I'm really glad that Fujitsu and others are pushing this agenda forward. So thank you.
And Georgina, you made the point, and it's a really important point, that in that user-centric design, it's so obvious but gets forgotten every time, is getting the consumer or the user of that service involved in the process up front. So if I'm creating a new disability passport or a new disability solution, and I'm not co-creating that with people with hidden or physical disabilities, but I'm working with them at the very end of the process. Just before I go to market with it, that's wrong. So how do we change that? And again, I think people are starting to think, well, it's so obvious, but we're really catching up with it. Absolutely.
I'm going to have to stop you. I know you could carry on talking for another 30 minutes. It's worth saying, if you're interested in the Invisible Government, the Estonian government case study that Patrick was talking about, if you go onto any of the social channels of Fujitsu and look at Fujitsu Forum TV, there's an interview that I held with Patrick and Martin Kaviat, who joined us from the Estonian government, walking through some of the amazing statistics that they have. If you are cynical about using Messenger or Facebook, the thought of using that in public sector, Estonia are using it daily and they get 0 complaints. It's truly enabling some wonderful things. It's well worth going and checking that video out. There's still plenty more insight to come from Fujitsu World Tour. By the time we wrapped, we'd have spanned interviews with AI, blockchain, quantum, security, multi-cloud, innovation, operational excellence, workplace, a trusted future, automation, financial services, and retail. All you need to do is go onto the social channels, put in the relevant keyword, and you'll be able to find a truckload of insight relevant to your organisation. Thank you for watching.